functions, functions, it's a block of code which is used to do some operation, right? So here this function, right, it just multiplies two numbers and returns that value. Okay, so this is that function. Here in JavaScript, you can assign the function to a variable. Like this, you can assign this function to a variable and you can call it using the variable. It accepts two parameters. You can pass the two parameters. It will multiply and return 4 into 3, 12. 12 will get assigned to x. So this way we can use functions in JavaScript. Um, these functions, right, it's called anonymous functions because there is no name. Usually you will have function and name of the function, right? See, if you usually function and name of function will be there. So here in this case, there is no name for the function, right? So it is called anonymous function. Okay. Um, so here, right now JavaScript code is need not end with a semicolon, but since it's an expression, when you do like this, you have to end the statement with a semicolon. And this a and b are the parameters for the function, and this is how you have to invoke the function. You have to call the function, right? Which variable you assign to, and 4 will be passed to a and 3 will be passed to b. Okay, this is what is function invocation, and there is some method called call. Okay, so how it will be? What is the purpose of call is? Um, with call, an object can use a method belonging to another object. So you can, with call, an object can use a method belonging to another object. So here full name is belonging to person, right? But now you are using a method here, full name, using person one. Person one doesn't have full name, correct? Person only has full name. So person one is using person method, right? Person one is using another object method, right? If you want to use another object method, you can use a call function. So basically this function will be called with person one object. Okay, so this pointer will refer to person one. Okay, so person one, what is the first name? Joe. Person one, what is the second name? Doe. Okay, so using call, we can use another object function also. So what is the syntax for that? What is the original object? Dot function name dot call, and which object is going to use that function? That object is the argument. This is how you have to call. Okay, this is call, and there is one more thing called apply. Okay, so here both are almost similar. Okay, so if you want to use an array, right? Only difference is like in array, right? You can pass some arguments also. Before there was no arguments, right? Like here you can pass an array of arguments, right? So you're calling with person one. This function is called with person one. So this will refer to person one, and what you're passing? You're passing two values that will get allocated to city and one will allocate to country. So with apply you can pass more values. Okay, and then there is bind is there. Okay, see in this case, right, this is basically a function, right? So in this case, this pointer might not be valid because you are not having when you use, right, see when a function is used as a callback, right, there is no name of the function, correct? There is no name given to the function. When you have this, when you call like this, right, the problem is, okay, sometimes this pointer might not be valid is what they're telling. When a function is used as a callback, okay, see here display function, okay, this is fine. Now here what? It is used as a callback. You are not calling the function straight away. You are calling the function after 3 milliseconds, right? So that time what happens? Now here, see here, after 3 seconds, what is happening? After 3 seconds, this pointer is not valid because it is called from a callback. You are not calling the function straight away, right? You are not calling the function person.display. You are setting a timeout, which means what? Set timeout is a function, right? This is a asynchronous function, and you specify a value, right? This is in milliseconds. So after 3 seconds, only this function will be called. But when this function is called, it's a callback, right? After 3 seconds, it is getting called. That time, this pointer will not be valid. It will not refer to the person object. That is why you're getting undefined. So in this case, what to do? Simple thing, you just need to bind it. So this person display, I'm binding it to that object. So this person, I'm binding for this person, for this display function, I'm binding this object. So whenever it's given as a callback, this pointer will be valid. Okay, after 3 seconds, again I'm getting undefined. What's the difference between these two? Okay. Okay. So here I'm binding it, and after binding, I am getting a new function. Right? Once this display is binded to this one, I'm getting a new function. That function you have to use in the set time mode. You should not use person.display here. So when you use it, it works properly. This is a use of bind. It used to bind a function to a object. Okay. And function closures. What are closures? Right? You know the variable can have local scope or global scope. Right? So let's go to closures. So from here, right, closure is a function having access to the parent scope, even after the parent function has closed. Okay, let's understand what is the meaning of it. So in this function, right, um, suppose what I'm doing is I have a counter and I have to increment it. Every time I call the function, I have to increment it and return it. Okay, so how to do it? I have to initialize the counter to 0 and I have to increment it. So let's, how I will do it? I have to increment the counter, right? So it will be counter plus plus. Okay, and I have to return the counter. Okay, so if this is the case, right? If I call add, what will happen? Every time I call add, so every time, right, when I call add, right, when I click count, so button count, if I click it, right, this my function will be called. This my function changes the inner HTML, right? This calls a function add. This function add, right, this is a function. It just assigns a number to 0 and increments it. Okay. When I click one time, what will happen? It will go here. It will be assigned to 0, increment, 1 will be returned. Even if I click next time, it will be assigned to 0. Okay, incremented. This has to happen only once, correct? First time only this has to happen. Next time this 0 should not be assigned. If it is assigned now, every time 0, 1, 1 will be present. 0, 1. Every time you call a function, 0 will be assigned. So always the counter value will be 1. But whenever I click count, it has to be incremented. So how to do that? One way to do it is, I'm just returning this, right? I'm incrementing inside a function. I can have function inside a function. JavaScript supports nested functions, which means inside a function, you can have a function. So inside this function, I'm having this function, which increments it and returns the counter. Okay. So add function returns this one, right? So if I run it, this returns whatever is returning, right? That is what is coming here. Okay. So what I want to do is, I want this code to be executed before I call this. Right? This code has to be executed before I call add, because if the code is executed before I call add, what this code does, this is returning this function, correct? This function will be getting assigned to add, right? And when I call, what will happen? The counter alone will be incremented and return the counter. Counter alone will be incremented, return the counter. So only once this code has to be executed, because the counter will be assigned to 0 only once. And this function, right, it has access to the parent function variables. This function, parent function is what? This function, right? So this function has access to the parent function variables, right? This is called closure in JavaScript. So what I have to do now? I have to execute this function only once. So when I execute this function only once, what happens? The 0 is assigned to the counter, and this function returns this function. This function will be assigned to add, and whenever I call add, only this will be called and counter will be incremented. So how to execute this function only once? By using self-invoking function. So you have to put a bracket here and then put a close bracket here and call the function. So what happens is, before you call the add function, when the code is getting executed, this function will be called, because it is self-invoking. It will be automatically invoked, automatically called. So when this function is called, what happens? This variable is assigned, and add is assigned with this function, right? This is what this code returns, right? So now add will be this function, right? And when I click count, it will keep on incrementing, because add has only this function. This code is already executed. This code returned this function which is got assigned to add, right? This is what is called function closure, right? The function which has access to the parent class variables even after this function is finished executing, right? This is what is function closure.